Mara carried plates the way she carried everything else in her life, carefully, quietly, and with her eyes down just enough to avoid trouble, but not so far that she missed a signal from the kitchen. The restaurant sat on a busy corner, where office workers came for quick dinners and weekend couples came for something that felt like a treat. And the dining room always smelled like butter and garlic. Even before the first order went out, Mara had learned the rhythm of it in a month. The swing door, the sharp call of table numbers, the tired jokes from cooks who had been standing since morning, and the small decisions that kept a shift from falling apart. Who needed water first? Who wanted another basket of bread? Who was watching the clock and would punish a slow server with a smaller tip? She worked the lunch rush and the dinner rush when she could. And when the manager offered an extra shift, she almost never refused. Because rent did not care how tired she was. And her mother's medication did not get cheaper because Mara's feet hurt. Her uniform was plain, black shirt, black apron, and a name tag that felt too bright against all the dark fabric. And she kept her hair tied back the same way every day, as if she could keep her thoughts tied back too. Most nights she did fine. She smiled, she apologized when food took too long. She laughed lightly at jokes that were not funny. And she said thank you even when someone snapped their fingers to get her attention. Inside, she lived with a constant quiet pressure, the kind that came from knowing one unexpected bill could push her into a week of panic, and the kind that came from remembering a different life that no longer felt like it belonged to her. There was a piano in the corner of the dining room, an upright one that the owner had bought years ago when the place tried to look more refined. But now it was mostly decoration. A piece of dark wood that caught dust and waited for someone to play a few soft songs on Friday nights. The manager kept a small sign on it that asked guests not to touch, and most people treated it like a fancy lamp, something to glance at while they waited for dessert. Mara noticed it the first day she started, and the sight of it hit her like a memory she had not asked for. The weight of keys under her fingers, the smell of old sheet music, the steady discipline of scales, the strange comfort of practicing alone when the world felt loud. She never told anyone she could play. Not because she wanted to hide a talent like a secret trophy, but because it was tied to everything that had gone wrong, scholarships that ended, lessons she could no longer afford. The slow collapse of plans she once believed were solid. Her hands had stopped being the hands of a pianist. At least that was what she told herself. They were hands that carried trays, wiped tables, and counted wrinkled bills at the end of the night. Still, the music did not leave her. It sat in her mind in small fragments. And sometimes, when the dining room softened in the late afternoon lull, she caught herself humming without thinking, a line of melody under her breath as she refilled sugar packets or rolled silverware. That humming was the only time she felt fully like herself. And she tried not to do it in front of customers on a Tuesday evening. The weather was cold enough that the windows fogged slightly from the heat inside, and the restaurant filled with regulars who wanted comfort food and a break from their own lives. One of those regulars was a man named Conrad Hale, a businessman who came in with the same confidence every week, wearing a coat that looked expensive and a watch that caught the light when he lifted his glass. Conrad liked attention. He liked staff who recognized him, and he liked speaking in a way that made nearby tables hear just enough to notice him. He always ordered steak, always asked for a specific wine, and always left a tip that was decent but carried a message. As if his money was proof of his judgment. Mara had served him 3 times already, and each time she felt the same tension when she approached his table. Not fear exactly, but the uncomfortable awareness that he watched people the way some people watched a show, waiting for a moment of weakness that would entertain him. That night, he arrived alone and chose a table with a clear view of the dining room, close enough to the piano that it sat behind him like a prop. Mara greeted him with her practiced smile, asked how his evening was, and listened as he answered in a tone that suggested his evening was important and everyone else's was not. She took his order, confirmed the temperature of his steak, and brought his drink quickly, because speed was the easiest way to avoid complaints. As she turned to leave, she caught herself humming again, barely a sound, the opening phrase of a piece she used to play when she was a teenager, something that had made her feel strong even when she felt alone. She did not realize she had done it until Conrad spoke. He did not call her name. He did not say, "Excuse me." He made a small sound like a laugh and said, "You hum like you think you belong on a stage." Mara stopped and looked at him, her smile tightening, and she asked if he needed anything else. Conrad leaned back and watched her as if she was an interesting object. Then he nodded toward the piano behind him. "You play?" he asked, with the kind of casual tone that already assumed the answer. Mara felt her face warm. Not from pride, but from the sudden exposure of something private. She shook her head lightly and said, "No, sir. I just hum sometimes." Conrad's eyes narrowed in amusement. "Everyone hums," he said. "But you are humming that like you know what it is. Like you have heard it from the inside." Mara did not want this conversation. She had tables waiting. she had an order to run. And she had no interest in giving him a piece of her story for free. She said she needed to check on the kitchen and stepped away, hoping that would end it, but Conrad was not the kind of man who let a moment end when he could turn it into something larger over the next hour. He found small ways to pull her attention back, asking questions he did not need answered, requesting a refill when his glass was half full, making her stand there just long enough to feel the eyes of other guests drift toward them when he finally finished his steak. He waved her over again, and his voice was louder now, pitched to travel. "Tell me," he said. "What is your name again?" Mara answered, still polite, still careful. "Mara." Conrad repeated it as if testing it. "Mara," he said. "Do you know how many people claim they can play piano? How many people think talent is the same as training?" Mara swallowed and said she was not claiming anything. He smiled and said, "That is good, because the piano is right there. And it would be a shame to embarrass yourself." A couple at the next table glanced over, then quickly looked back at their plates, the way people do when they sense tension and do not know whether it will become entertainment or conflict. Mara felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the kind she had felt in other jobs when customers decided they owned the room. She tried to end it in the simplest way. "Sir," she said, "if you need anything else I can help. Otherwise I should get back to work." Conrad tapped the edge of the table with his finger, slow and deliberate. "I will make you a deal," he said. And when he said deal, he made it sound like a gift. Mara did not answer, because answering would make it real. He continued, "Anyway, I bet you cannot play that piano. Not really, not in a way that would impress anyone," he said. Mara shook her head again, more firmly. "I do not play here," she said. Conrad's smile widened, as if refusal was the answer he wanted. "That is not what I asked," he said. "I asked if you can." Mara felt her throat tighten, because the truth was complicated, because she could, and because she did not know if she still could the way she once did. She said, "I have played before, a long time ago." Conrad's eyes lit with satisfaction, as if he had pulled a confession out of her. "A long time ago," he repeated. And now his voice carried to more tables, drawing more attention. He reached into his wallet, took out a stack of bills, and placed them on the table with care, making sure the green edges were visible. "Here is what we do," he said. "I put down $1,000, and if you play something real, something that proves you are not just humming to look interesting, then you take it." Mara stared at the money, and she hated how her mind immediately calculated what it could cover: part of rent, the overdue electric bill, a pharmacy refill for her mother. Conrad lifted his chin, enjoying the silence. "If you cannot," he said, "then you admit you were pretending, and you apologize for wasting my time with your little stage humming." Mara felt anger flare in her stomach, clean and hot, but she forced her face to remain still. "I was not wasting your time," she said. "I was working." Conrad chuckled and looked around, as if inviting the room to share the joke. The manager, Paul, noticed the attention and started walking over, his expression already tired, because any public scene meant complaints, bad reviews, and problems. Paul asked if everything was all right. Conrad answered for Mara, still smiling. "Everything is fine," he said. "I am just offering Mara a chance to show off. She claims she can play piano." Mara spoke quickly, steady but tight. "I did not claim that," she said. "I said I have played before." Paul looked between them, eyes flicking to the cash, then back to Mara, and Mara could see what he was thinking: the risk, the distraction, the possible mess if this became loud enough. Paul lowered his voice and asked Mara, "Do you want to do this?" Mara opened her mouth, and for a moment she almost said no, because no was safer, because she had learned that safety mattered more than pride. But as she looked at Conrad, she saw not just arrogance but certainty, the certainty that people like her existed to be tested, to be laughed at, to be reminded of their place. She also saw, in the edge of her own reflection in the window, someone who had spent too long pretending she was smaller than she was. From the kitchen doorway, a coworker named Leela watched with concern. And when Mara looked at her, Leela gave a small nod, not pushing, just offering support. Mara took a slow breath and felt the weight of the room settle around her. The quiet curiosity of strangers, the nervous attention of staff, the manager's worry, and Conrad's hunger for control. She said, "I will play, but not for humiliation, and not for a joke." Conrad's eyebrows lifted, amused by her attempt to set terms. "You will play for the bet," he said, as if he was the one granting permission. Mara looked at Paul and said, "I will not cause trouble. I will be quick." Paul hesitated, then nodded once, because the moment had already escaped his control, and because sometimes the best way to stop a fire was to watch it burn fast. Mara untied her apron and handed it to Leela, who took it carefully like it was fragile. Mara walked toward the piano with a strange mix of dread and familiarity, and with every step she felt her past and present pull against each other. She sat on the bench and adjusted it without thinking, muscle memory guiding her hands. And when she placed her fingers on the keys, she felt a small shock of recognition, as if her body remembered before her mind could interfere. The first note came out soft, slightly uneven, and her heart clenched. Because the room was listening, and because she had not played in years, she closed her eyes for a moment. Not to create drama, but to focus, to find the center of the music the way she used to when she practiced late at night. Her shoulders lowered, her breathing steadied, and her fingers began again. And this time the sound connected. Clean and true, and she felt the piece open like a door. Conrad leaned forward, his smile still present but less certain. And the restaurant, which had been full of clinking glasses and low conversation, began to quiet as people turned their attention toward the corner. Mara played a simple introduction first, something almost like an apology to herself. Then she let the melody deepen. And the notes carried the emotion she had been holding back for too long: grief, pride, exhaustion, and a stubborn hope that had refused to die. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, her hands were no longer shaking. They were steady, strong, and honest, and she was not thinking about Conrad or the money. She was thinking about the way music could hold a person together when life tried to pull them apart. The kitchen door opened, and one of the cooks stepped out. Wiping his hands on a towel, drawn by the sound, Leela stood near the service station, eyes wide, not in surprise that Mara could play, but in the way she realized her friend had been carrying something beautiful. In silence, Mara finished the last phrase with care, letting it settle naturally, and when the final chord faded, the room stayed still for a breath that felt like respect rather than suspense. Then the applause started, scattered at first, then growing until it filled the restaurant. Loud enough that Paul looked relieved and overwhelmed at the same time. Mara stood slowly, her cheeks flushed, and she looked at the floor for a second as if to gather herself. Then she faced the room again, blinking back emotion she did not want to show strangers but could not fully control. Conrad sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, his confidence cracked by something he had not expected: real skill, real history, and real dignity from someone he had tried to shrink. Mara walked back toward his table, and she did not rush, because she was not running from him anymore. Conrad cleared his throat and glanced at the money, then at the faces around him, and he knew he could not turn this into a joke now without exposing himself. He pushed the bills toward Mara with a stiff motion and said, "I suppose you win." Mara did not touch the money immediately. She said, quietly but clearly, "I did not play to win. I played because you tried to shame me, and I will not carry that for you." Conrad's face tightened, and for the first time he looked smaller than his suit. Mara took the money anyway, because she needed it, and because there was no virtue in letting pride punish her more than life already had she thanked him in the same polite tone she used with every customer. But her eyes did not lower this time. Paul approached and asked Mara if she was all right. Mara nodded, and her voice was steady as she said yes, and she tied her apron back on, returning to work with the strange feeling that something had shifted inside her, not her circumstances yet, but her sense of what she deserved. Leela leaned close and whispered, "You were amazing," and Mara answered, "I forgot I could still be me for the rest of the night." Customers treated her differently, not like a celebrity, but like a person with a story. And a few slipped extra bills into the check presenters without making it a show. Mara kept moving, kept serving. But each time she passed the piano, she felt less like it was a ghost, and more like it was a possibility waiting patiently for her to come back the next day. Mara expected the restaurant to feel awkward, like everyone would pretend nothing had happened. But the energy was different the moment she walked in. Leela waved from the server station with an expression that carried quiet pride, and one of the cooks gave Mara a nod that was almost respectful. Paul did not mention the bet right away, but he did not avoid her either. He simply said he was glad the night ended without a complaint call, then added softer that she handled herself better than most people would have. Mara tried to keep her focus on work. She reminded herself that one good moment did not change rent, did not erase debt, did not fix her mother's health. Still, she felt a steady warmth inside her that she had not felt in years, like a part of her had been returned. When she passed the piano, she did not look away this time. She noticed the small chips in the wood, the keys slightly yellowed, the bench worn smooth at the edge, and she thought about the countless hands that had touched it before hers. In the early afternoon, an older couple came in and asked to sit near the piano. They were gentle people with tired faces, the kind who treated service workers like human beings. The woman told Mara she used to teach music, and she thanked Mara for playing the night before, saying it made her remember her sister who had played at family gatherings. Mara listened, surprised by how much that simple gratitude moved her. She wanted to explain herself, to say she was not brave or special, that she had been cornered. Instead, she just said she was glad it meant something, and the woman squeezed her hand briefly before letting go. Later, after the lunch rush slowed, Paul called Mara into the small office near the back. The office smelled like printer paper and old coffee. Paul leaned against the desk and told her the owner had called him. The owner was not angry, Paul said, and that had been his biggest fear. The owner had heard about the applause and the tips that followed, and he was thinking in his practical way about what could be good for business. He wanted to bring live piano back on certain nights, and he asked if Mara would consider playing for an hour on weekends. It would come with a small extra payment and a guaranteed break from table service during that time. Mara felt her stomach twist. The idea sounded like opportunity, but it also sounded like pressure, like turning her private wound into entertainment again. She told Paul she needed time to think. Paul nodded, then surprised her by saying, in a voice that held no sarcasm, that she should not let one ugly customer decide what she did with her talent. He added that the bet had been cruel, but her response had been something rare, and he hoped she understood that. Mara went back to the dining room and kept working, but her mind stayed on the offer. That night after the shift ended, she walked home instead of taking the bus, even though it was cold. She needed the air and the movement. She thought about the last time she had played in a real setting, how her hands shook then too, but the fear had come from wanting to be perfect. Now the fear came from being seen at all. She reached her apartment and found her mother asleep in the living room chair, an empty teacup on the table beside her. Mara covered her with a blanket and stood for a moment watching her breathe. The money from Conrad was tucked safely away, already assigned in her mind to bills, but it felt like more than money. It felt like proof that she could still stand up when she had to. Over the next week, the restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but small changes lingered. Customers spoke to Mara with more patience. A few asked if she would play again. Mara always answered that she did not know. She did not want to promise anything she could not sustain. Yet she found herself practicing quietly on the restaurant piano after closing, just 10 minutes, sometimes 20, when everyone else was counting receipts or wiping down the last surfaces. The keys were slightly stiff and the pedals squeaked, but she learned how to make it sing anyway. On Friday, Conrad returned. He came in as if nothing had happened, wearing the same kind of coat, the same polished expression. He chose a table farther from the piano, which Mara noticed immediately. Paul assigned another server to him at first, but Conrad asked for Mara by name, in a tone that suggested he still believed he had a claim on the story. Mara felt a flicker of dread, then steadied herself. She walked over, greeted him, and waited. Conrad did not apologize. Instead, he spoke as if the previous week had been an unusual business negotiation. He said he had been surprised, then added that she should not take it personally. He tried to frame his cruelty as harmless fun, as if that would make it smaller. Mara listened without reacting, because she had learned that arguing with someone like him only gave them more air. When he finished, she said calmly that what happened had been personal for her, whether or not he meant it that way. She told him she was there to work and she would serve him professionally, but she would not accept him speaking to her as if she existed for his amusement. Conrad stared at her. For a moment it looked like he might raise his voice. Then he glanced around and noticed that other guests were watching again, not with curiosity this time, but with a quiet readiness to judge him. He lowered his tone and said fine, and he placed his order. When Mara walked away, her hands did not shake. She felt tired but not small. That weekend, Mara agreed to try 1 hour of piano on Saturday night. She insisted that it be announced simply, no spectacle, no story. Paul accepted, mostly because he knew she would walk away if he pushed. The owner approved the plan. The restaurant's small social media page posted a short note about live piano returning without naming Mara. Saturday arrived and the restaurant filled earlier than usual. Mara served tables for the first part of the evening, then washed her hands slowly in the staff bathroom before the hour began. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone older than her age, not in appearance but in the weight behind her eyes. She thought of the teenager she had been, dreaming of conservatories and recital halls, and she felt a brief ache, then a steadier acceptance. Life had pulled her off that path, but it had not erased the road completely. When it was time, she sat at the piano. She began with simple pieces that matched the room, soft and warm, music that made conversation easier instead of competing with it. She kept her posture relaxed and her expression neutral, the way a working musician does when the job is to hold an atmosphere. Yet inside, she felt something opening again, a part of her that had been shut tight for survival. Halfway through, she noticed the older couple from the earlier week sitting near the piano again. The former teacher smiled at her with a look that said, "You belong here too, even if you do not know it yet." Mara nodded slightly, then continued. The hour ended with applause, not loud, not disruptive, but sincere. A few guests came over afterward to thank her. One man, a local event coordinator, asked if she ever played private gatherings. Mara said she was not sure. He offered a card anyway and told her to call if she ever wanted to try. Another guest, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, mentioned a community arts center that held open recitals and offered small stipends for performers. She said she could connect Mara with the director. Mara took the information with cautious gratitude, her mind already measuring what she could handle without collapsing her responsibilities. Later that night, Paul handed her an envelope with the extra pay. It was not a fortune, but it felt earned in a different way than tips because it recognized her for something beyond endurance. In the following weeks, Mara built a fragile routine. She continued working shifts, continued caring for her mother, continued counting every dollar. But she also practiced. She watched free lessons online when she could, not because she lacked knowledge, but because she needed reminders, structure, and a sense that she was part of a world again. She reached out to the community arts center and attended a small recital night. The room was modest, folding chairs and uneven lighting, but the people there listened with genuine attention. No one tried to turn her into a joke. No one asked her to prove herself with a bet. She played a short piece and felt her hands steady from the first measure. One evening after a recital, the director spoke with her privately. He asked about her background and listened without interrupting. When Mara mentioned why she stopped pursuing music, he did not pity her. He simply said that many talented people got pulled away for reasons beyond their control, and that returning was not failure, it was a choice. He offered her a small paid spot in their next program, nothing glamorous but real. Meanwhile, Conrad's presence faded. He still came to the restaurant sometimes, but he no longer tried to control the room. Once he heard Mara playing from his table and left before the set ended. Mara watched him go with a calm that surprised her. She did not need him to validate anything. She did not need him to suffer either. His role in her story had already shrunk to its proper size, a man who believed money could define people, and who had been corrected by something he could not buy. Months later, Mara stood in her apartment kitchen paying bills with less panic than before. The restaurant piano nights had become regular, and she was occasionally booked for small events through the community center. She was not rich, she was not rescued, but she was no longer trapped in a single identity. She was a waitress who worked hard, a daughter who carried responsibility, and a musician who had returned to her own hands. On a quiet night, after her mother fell asleep, Mara sat at a small used keyboard she had finally purchased with saved money and played softly. The notes filled the room with something gentle and steady. She realized that the most astonishing part of that night in the restaurant was not that she impressed strangers. It was that she remembered herself, and she chose to keep going. She remembered herself, and she chose to keep going. Mara kept telling herself that the night with the bet was finished, filed away like an unpleasant receipt, but the restaurant did not let it stay buried. By Wednesday, enough people had heard about it that new customers arrived already half curious, scanning the corner where the piano stood as if expecting it to wake up on its own. Mara moved through her shifts with practiced calm, yet she felt exposed in a way she could not fully control, like her private history had become part of the room's decor. She tried to keep her routine tight. She arrived early, stocked napkins, checked tables, and kept her mind on tasks that had clear endings. The kitchen noise helped because it was blunt and ordinary. Steam, heat, shouted times, plates sliding onto trays. Those sounds belonged to her current life. The piano belonged to something else. Near the end of lunch service, when the restaurant quieted and the sunlight fell across the floor in pale rectangles, a man in a simple jacket waited by the host's stand. He was not dressed like Conrad, not polished, not loud. He had a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and the kind of posture that suggested he spent a lot of time listening. Paul waved Mara over and introduced him as Mr. Chen, the owner. Mara had met him only once before in passing, and he had seemed like a man who watched numbers more than people. Today, he looked directly at her. He did not mention the rich man, he did not mention the applause. He asked how long she had worked there and whether she planned to stay through the winter. Mara answered carefully because honesty often had a cost in jobs like this. Mr. Chen nodded, then asked if she had ever played regularly in public. The question landed gently, but it still made her chest tighten. Mara said she had played years ago, but not in a long time. Mr. Chen listened without interrupting, then said he had bought the piano back when he believed the restaurant should feel more like a neighborhood place, not just a room where people ate and left. He said live music once a week had always increased reservations, not because people wanted a show, but because they wanted warmth. Then he said he would like to bring that back, and if Mara was willing, he would pay her for 1 hour on Saturday nights. Not tips, not favors, but a set amount plus her meal. Mara felt her throat tighten again, this time from uncertainty rather than anger. She could already see the risk. If she agreed, people might come expecting the same dramatic story, expecting her to prove something again. If she refused, she would carry the quiet regret of turning away from a door that had opened. She looked at Paul, who stood by the office doorway with his arms crossed, watching her face as if he could read what she was afraid to say. Mara asked if it had to be announced. Mr. Chen shook his head. He said it could be simple, a small note on the menu, live piano on Saturdays. No mention of her name if she preferred. He added in a matter-of-fact tone that the restaurant needed reasons for people to choose it over the place down the street, and talent was a reason. The word talent made Mara flinch because it sounded like praise, and praise felt dangerous when you had spent years surviving without it. She told him she needed time to think. Mr. Chen accepted that with a short nod, then left without pushing, the way people do when they are used to making decisions and do not need to win every conversation. That evening after her shift, Mara walked home through cold air that stung her cheeks and made her eyes water. She passed a music store window that displayed keyboards and guitars, and she slowed without meaning to. A teenager inside pressed keys with uncertain fingers while a parent watched. Mara felt a sharp, unexpected grief, not because she envied them, but because she remembered being that young, believing effort always led somewhere safe. At home, her mother was awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with a pill organizer open in front of her. Her mother looked tired in the way that came from fighting her own body, but she tried to smile when Mara entered. Mara warmed soup and listened to her mother talk about a neighbor's dog, about a television show, about small harmless things. Mara did not mention the piano offer at first. She did not want to plant hope in a space where hope could become pressure. But as they ate, her mother asked how work was going, and Mara heard herself say quietly that the owner wanted her to play on Saturdays. Her mother paused, spoon hovering, and her eyes filled with something that was not quite joy and not quite sadness. She said she remembered Mara practicing late at night with headphones on, so the neighbors would not complain. She said she used to worry that Mara's hands would cramp because she refused to stop. Then she said, almost apologetically, that she hated being the reason Mara quit. Mara reached across the table and took her mother's hand. She told her not to say that. She said life happened and they did what they could. Still, her chest ached because the truth was complicated. Her mother's illness had not been a choice, but the weight of caring for her had shaped Mara's life all the same. Mara looked at her mother and realized that returning to music did not have to mean abandoning responsibility. It could mean carrying both carefully, like plates balanced on an arm. 2 days later, Mara stayed after closing. The dining room lights were dim, and the chairs were flipped onto tables in neat rows. Paul counted receipts in the office while Leela wiped down the coffee station. Mara walked to the piano with a cautiousness that felt almost superstitious. She sat and placed her fingers on the keys. They were cool beneath her skin. She played a scale slowly, not for performance but for truth. Her fingers stumbled at first, then found a steadier path. She played a simple piece she knew by memory, something gentle and forgiving. The notes sounded slightly out of tune but alive. Leela stood nearby without speaking. When Mara finished, Leela said, as if stating a fact that Mara still had it. Mara surprised herself by shaking her head. She said it was not about having it. It was about whether she could afford to want it again. Leela did not argue. She just said that wanting something did not make Mara selfish. It made her human. Saturday came fast. The restaurant filled early, and Mara worked the first part of the night serving tables with her usual efficiency. She kept checking the clock. Each time she looked, her stomach tightened because the hour of piano felt like a cliff edge. At 7:30, Paul told her to wash up and take a break. He spoke briskly, like he was talking about any work task, and Mara understood he was doing her a favor by making it ordinary. In the staff bathroom, Mara scrubbed her hands longer than necessary. She looked at her fingers in the mirror, noticing the slight roughness from constant washing and carrying. She thought about how pianists protected their hands, how they avoided burns and cuts. Mara had never had that luxury. Her hands had belonged to work, not art, yet they were still her hands. When she sat at the piano, conversation continued around her. A few people looked over with interest, but most kept eating. Mara felt relief. She did not want the room to freeze into expectation again. She began with something soft, a simple progression that blended into the restaurant noise. The music was not a declaration. It was an offering, like warm bread set down without fanfare. As the minutes passed, the room subtly changed. Voices lowered without anyone asking. Forks paused a beat longer between bites. It was not silence. It was a tension settling naturally, the way people lean toward warmth when they feel it. Mara let herself breathe. She kept the pieces approachable, melodies that held the dining room rather than demanding it. She could feel her shoulders drop, her wrists loosen, her body remembering a language it had almost forgotten. Halfway through the set, she noticed Conrad at the back, seated with another man. He had arrived quietly without his usual show. Mara's stomach clenched, but she kept playing. She refused to let his presence steer her hands. The second man leaned toward Conrad and said something, and Conrad's face tightened. He watched Mara for a long moment, then looked away, as if he had expected her to fail and was irritated by her steadiness. Mara played on, and with each piece she felt less like she was defending herself and more like she was simply doing work she respected. When the hour ended, she finished cleanly and stood. A few tables clapped, others nodded or smiled. It was not the explosive applause from the bet night, but it felt better in a deeper way because it was not fueled by conflict. It was appreciation without a wound. As Mara stepped away from the piano, Conrad approached. He did not come too close. He stopped at a polite distance, as if he sensed the room would not tolerate him crossing a line again. He said with a stiff voice that she played well. It sounded like the hardest sentence he had spoken all week. Mara waited, giving him space to find the rest of what he needed to say. He did not apologize. He did not mention the money. He simply added that he had not expected it, then turned and walked away. Mara watched him go and felt something unexpected, not triumph but relief. His opinion no longer felt like a weight on her. She went back to the server station and tied on her apron again. Leela handed her a water and asked if she was okay. Mara nodded, then laughed quietly, surprised by the sound. She said she was tired, but it was the kind of tired that came after doing something true. At the end of the night, Paul handed her an envelope with the promised pay. Mara held it for a second before putting it in her bag, feeling its lightness and what it represented. It was not a rescue. It was not a fantasy. It was one more stream of income, one more proof that her past could help her present instead of haunting it. As she left the restaurant, she glanced back through the window. The piano sat in its corner again, ordinary and still. But to Mara, it no longer looked like a reminder of loss. It looked like a tool waiting, and she realized that for the first time in years, she was not only surviving. She was choosing. Mara kept playing on Saturdays, 1 hour that started small and gradually became part of the restaurant's identity. At first, she treated it like extra work, something to complete cleanly and quietly before returning to tables. Over time, she noticed how the music changed the room in a steady, practical way. People lingered a few minutes longer. Couples spoke softer, not because they were forced to, but because the sound made them want to. Even the staff moved differently during her set, less rushed, as if the rhythm gave everyone a shared pace. Mr. Chen did not praise her much, but he kept his word. He paid her on time, and he invested in small fixes that made the piano easier to play. The bench stopped wobbling. A tuner came once and brought the worst notes back into line. Mara watched all of this with a guarded gratitude because she had learned that good things sometimes came with hidden costs. Still, nothing bad followed. The hour remained an hour. The restaurant remained her job, not her stage. One night after her set, a woman approached and introduced herself as Serena Walsh. Serena was in her late 40s, dressed simply, with a calm voice that carried authority without pushing. She said she worked with a community arts center that hosted low-pressure recitals and local programs. She was careful not to flatter Mara. She simply said she could hear training in Mara's playing, and she asked whether Mara ever performed outside of work. Mara's first instinct was to decline. She had built her life around predictability. Work schedules, medication refills, grocery lists, bus routes. Performance sounded like uncertainty and ego and disappointment. But Serena did not treat it like a fantasy. She described the programs like practical steps, a short set on a weeknight, a small stipend, an audience that understood regular life because most of them lived it. She offered Mara a card and said there was no pressure, only an open door. Mara put the card in her apron and forgot about it for 2 days, then took it out again at home while her mother watched television. The card sat on the table beside overdue mail. Mara stared at it until her mother noticed. Her mother asked what it was and Mara told her. Her mother did not cry or make it heavy. She just said, if you want to try, then try, and if it hurts, then stop. We will still be here. That simple permission loosened something in Mara. She called Serena the next morning. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she spoke. Serena invited her to visit the center and meet the director. The art center was smaller than Mara expected. A modest building with a multi-purpose room, a few posters, and the soft smell of dust and old paint. The director, Jamal Torres, greeted her with a handshake and the kind of attentive eye contact that made her feel seen without being examined. He asked about her background and listened without interrupting, even when Mara stumbled over the parts that still felt embarrassing, the scholarship she lost when her family situation collapsed, the years of not playing, the way she had trained herself to expect nothing. Jamal told her a truth that was both gentle and firm. He said plenty of talented people step away from art for real reasons, and stepping back does not erase their value. He offered her a short slot in an upcoming community night, 10 minutes, paid, with rehearsal time in the room beforehand so she would not feel thrown onto a stage unprepared. Mara agreed before she could talk herself out of it. In the weeks leading up to the performance, Mara's life became more full but also more ordered. She practiced at the restaurant after closing when she could, and at home she saved for a used keyboard so she could rehearse without depending on the piano in the dining room. She cut expenses in small ways. No takeout, no extra snacks, fewer bus rides when she could walk. The saving felt familiar, but this time it had a purpose that was not survival alone. When she brought the used keyboard home, her mother touched the keys lightly like she was touching something sacred. Mara set it up in the corner of the living room near the window. The first time she played there softly, her mother fell asleep in her chair with a peaceful expression Mara had not seen in months. Mara kept playing, not loud, not showy, just steady, letting the sound fill the apartment with something that felt like shelter. At the restaurant, people noticed the change in her even before they understood why. She carried herself differently. Not arrogant, not hardened, simply more present. When a customer spoke sharply, she no longer absorbed it like a punishment she deserved. She responded politely and moved on. She began to understand that confidence could be quiet. Conrad came in less often now. When he did, he watched from a distance and kept his comments to himself. One night, as Mara finished her set, he stood near the exit. He looked as if he wanted to speak, then hesitated. Mara felt a brief annoyance, then a strange indifference. She realized she did not need closure from him. The night he bet against her had been his decision. What came after belonged to her. At the community night, Mara arrived early with her hands cold and her stomach tight. The room was simple, folding chairs, a small upright piano, a few people checking cables and adjusting lights. No fancy curtains, no spotlight designed to humiliate or glorify, just a space built for ordinary people to share what mattered to them. Jamal greeted her and showed her the piano. Mara sat and played a few notes, testing the feel. The keys were lighter than the restaurant piano, the tone clearer. She practiced her opening phrase until she felt her breath return to normal. Then she stood and waited backstage, listening to the other performers. A teenager reading a poem, an older man playing guitar, a woman singing quietly with a nervous smile. When it was Mara's turn, she walked out and sat down without looking for anyone specific in the audience. Her hands trembled for a moment, then she placed her fingers and began. She chose a piece that carried both discipline and warmth, nothing flashy for the sake of flash, but something that told the truth of her hands. As she played, she stopped thinking about whether she belonged there. The music did not ask permission. It simply moved forward one note at a time, and she moved with it. When she finished, applause rose, not huge but sincere and steady. She stood and bowed slightly, then stepped off stage with her heart beating hard, not from fear now, but from the clean rush of doing something she had missed. Serena hugged her briefly and whispered that she was proud of her. Mara nodded, unable to speak for a moment. After the show, a man approached and asked if she taught beginners. Mara almost laughed because the idea of teaching felt too big. She told him she was not a teacher. He said his daughter had been struggling to practice, and seeing Mara play made him realize music could be more than achievement, it could be comfort. He asked if Mara would consider a few starter lessons, paid, flexible. Mara took his number and said she would think. On the walk home, Mara felt the familiar worry creep in, the fear of adding one more responsibility to a life already full. But she also felt something else, a quiet excitement that did not feel reckless. She did not have to choose between being practical and being alive. In the months that followed, Mara built a careful bridge between her work and her music. She kept her restaurant shifts because the stability mattered. She played Saturdays and performed at the Arts Center once a month when she could. She took on a small handful of beginner lessons, only what fit, only what she could sustain without burning out. The extra income helped, but more importantly, it changed her sense of what her future could hold. It was no longer a narrow hallway with bills at the end. It was a room with more than one door. Her mother's health remained fragile, and there were still nights when Mara sat beside her bed counting breaths and wondering what would happen next. The difference now was that Mara had something that refilled her, something that made the hardest parts feel less like an endless drain. On particularly difficult evenings, she played quietly at home after her mother fell asleep, and the music steadied her nerves more than any advice ever had. One Saturday near the end of the year, the restaurant held a small holiday dinner. Mr. Chen asked Mara to play a little longer that night, and she agreed. The dining room was full, warm with voices and clinking glasses. At one point, Mara looked up from the keys and saw Leela swaying slightly while she polished cutlery, smiling without realizing she was smiling. Paul stood by the bar watching the room, looking tired but satisfied. Mara felt a surge of gratitude for the ordinary people who had helped her without making it a spectacle. When she finished her last piece, the applause was loud enough to make her cheeks warm. She stood nodded and returned to work for the final stretch of the night. Later, while counting tips in the back, she realized how strange it was that one cruel bet had pushed her into the open. She did not excuse the cruelty, she did not thank it, but she accepted the reality that sometimes a moment meant to break someone could also expose the strength they had been forced to hide. On her walk home, the air was cold and clear. She carried her bag on one shoulder, her fingers sore in a good way. She thought about the next month, another center performance, a couple of lessons, another Saturday set, the same responsibilities waiting at home. Nothing had turned into a miracle. No record deal, no sudden wealth, no perfect ending. But Mara felt something solid inside her, the kind of stability that came from knowing she was not only surviving other people's choices anymore. She opened her apartment door quietly, checked on her mother, then sat at the keyboard by the window. She played a few soft chords, letting them settle into the room like a promise she could keep. She understood now that her life did not have to be defined by the people who tried to shame her. It could be defined by the moments she chose to return to herself, again and again, with patience. Serena Walsh returned the following Saturday, not as a customer chasing a story, but as someone who knew how to offer an opportunity without turning it into pressure. She sat near the edge of the room during Mara's set, listening in a way that made Mara feel less like background and more like a person doing careful work. When the hour ended, Serena waited until Mara had stepped away from the piano and tied her apron back on, so the approach would not feel like a spotlight. Serena introduced herself simply and said she worked with a community arts center a few neighborhoods over. She did not mention Conrad or the bet or the applause that followed it. She said she had heard live piano was back on Saturdays and wanted to listen for herself. Then she told Mara gently that she could hear structure in her playing, the kind that comes from training rather than luck. Mara felt her first instinct rise, the urge to downplay, to shrink, to say it was nothing. Serena seemed to anticipate that and added that she was not offering praise as a performance, only naming what she heard. Mara wiped her hands on the sides of her apron, a habit she could not break, and asked what Serena wanted. Serena smiled and said she wanted to invite Mara to visit the center, meet their director, and consider playing a short set at one of their community nights. She described it like a practical arrangement, not a dream. 10 minutes, a small stipend, a room full of people who came to listen because they cared, not because they wanted drama. Mara listened and felt the tension behind her ribs, the fear of starting something she could not sustain. She told Serena she worked a lot and took care of her mother. Serena nodded like she had heard this 100 times and respected it. She said that was exactly why the center existed, to make art possible for people with real lives. She handed Mara a card and said she could call anytime, even if it was weeks later, and there would be no awkwardness if Mara decided not to. After Serena left, Mara stood behind the service station for a moment longer than she needed, staring at the card as if it might bite. Leela came over, glanced at it, and asked if Mara was okay. Mara shrugged and said it was nothing. Leela lifted an eyebrow, not pushing, just letting Mara hear the lie. Paul called for a table run, and the shift swallowed the moment, but Mara could feel the card in her pocket like a small weight. At home that night, Mara placed the card on the kitchen table beside the stack of mail. Her mother was half asleep in the living room chair, television murmuring softly. Mara warmed water for tea and tried not to look at the card again, because looking at it made her imagine a world where she did more than cover bills. That kind of imagining could become dangerous if it led to disappointment. Her mother woke enough to ask how work went, and Mara told her about the Saturday set, the way the room had listened without turning her into a spectacle. Then she mentioned Serena trying to make it sound casual. Her mother's eyes sharpened with interest. She asked what the center was like, and Mara admitted she did not know yet. Her mother said in a steady voice that Mara had stopped playing because life demanded it, not because she failed. Then she added something Mara did not expect, that she missed hearing Mara practice at night because it had made the apartment feel less heavy. The next day Mara called Serena. Her voice shook slightly at first, and she hated that, hated how quickly her confidence could dissolve when she asked for something. Serena answered warmly and scheduled a visit on a weekday afternoon when Mara could come before dinner service. Mara almost backed out twice, but she went. The art center was modest, a building with scuffed floors and posters that looked hand-pinned rather than professionally printed. It smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Serena introduced Mara to Jamal Torres, the director, a man with calm eyes and a way of listening that made silence feel safe instead of awkward. He asked Mara about her background, and Mara gave a shortened version at first, then found herself saying more because he did not interrupt and did not react with pity. When she described leaving music behind, Jamal did not call it a tragedy. He called it a common story, one he took seriously. He offered Mara a slot at the next community night, a short set with a small stipend and rehearsal access to the room beforehand. Mara asked what the audience was like. Jamal said it was mixed: students, retirees, parents, people who worked day jobs and came because they wanted something honest at the end of the week. He said no one came to judge a life. They came to share one. Mara agreed, then left the center with her mind buzzing, half excited, half afraid. Excitement felt like stepping onto thin ice. She got through her dinner shift on autopilot, smiling at customers while her thoughts ran ahead to the date on the calendar. The fear was not stage fright in the usual sense. It was the fear of investing effort into something she loved, only to have life snatch it away again. She began practicing more deliberately. After closing, she stayed 15 minutes at the restaurant piano, then 20, then 30, working through pieces that demanded control but did not punish her hands. She relearned endurance, the way her wrists should float, the way her shoulders should soften. She practiced at home by tapping patterns on the table when she could not risk waking her mother. She saved money slowly for a used keyboard, cutting small comforts she barely had in the first place. When she finally bought the keyboard from a man selling it online, she carried it up the stairs to her apartment and set it near the window. The first time she played it, the sound was thinner than an acoustic piano, but the feeling was real. Her mother sat nearby with a blanket over her lap and listened without speaking. After a few minutes, her mother's breathing deepened, and she fell asleep with a peaceful expression Mara rarely saw. Mara kept playing, softer now, as if she was holding the whole room steady. At the restaurant, Mara's Saturday sets became a quiet draw. Mr. Chen arranged for the piano to be tuned again, and the improvement made Mara feel strangely cared for. She did not let herself read too much into it. It was a business decision, but she still appreciated it. The staff also seemed to treat the hour differently, protecting it, keeping the walkway clear, dimming the lights slightly without being asked. Conrad appeared one Saturday near the back, seated with another man. He was quieter than before, and he avoided Mara's eyes. Mara noticed him, felt the old flare of anger, then returned to her playing. The room belonged to the music now, not to his opinion. She finished the set and walked away without looking for his reaction. After the set, Conrad approached while Mara was placing menus near the host's stand. He stopped a polite distance away and said stiffly that she played well. He looked as if he expected her to say something that would either punish him or forgive him. Mara did neither. She thanked him the way she thanked any customer. Conrad hesitated, then left. Mara realized she did not feel satisfaction or resentment, only a clean distance. His power over her had been mostly in her imagination, built by old habits of shrinking. The community night arrived on a cold Thursday. Mara took the bus to the center with her hands tucked in her coat pockets, fingers flexing as if to keep them warm. Inside, the room was set with folding chairs and a small stage area. People chatted quietly, sipping coffee from paper cups. The piano looked worn but cared for, and Jamal greeted her like he had expected her all week, not like she was a last-minute addition. Mara rehearsed briefly, testing the keys, adjusting the bench. She chose a piece that could carry emotion without demanding theatrics. When her turn came, she walked out, sat, and placed her fingers down. The first notes were steady. Her hands did not shake the way she feared they would. She played as if she was speaking clearly, not begging to be understood. When she finished, applause rose, warm and sustained. It was not the roar of a restaurant reacting to a surprise, but the deliberate appreciation of people who came to listen. Mara stood, bowed slightly, and stepped off stage with her heart pounding in a way that felt healthy, like blood returning to a limb that had been numb. Afterward, Serena introduced Mara to a few people. One man asked if she taught beginners. Mara almost refused automatically, then heard herself ask questions instead: what schedule, what age, what expectations. The man said his daughter struggled with confidence and needed a teacher who understood pressure. Mara took his number and said she would think about it. Jamal told her she was welcome to play again in a future program if she wanted, no commitment, only an option. Over the next months, Mara built a careful bridge between survival and growth. She stayed at the restaurant because stability mattered, but she played Saturdays regularly and began performing at the center once a month when her schedule allowed. She accepted a small handful of beginner lessons, only what fit without exhausting her. The extra money helped with bills, but what mattered more was the steady sense that her life was no longer a single narrow tunnel. Her mother's health remained unpredictable. There were still nights when Mara sat beside her bed counting breaths and feeling fear press on her chest. On those nights, Mara played softly at the keyboard after her mother fell asleep, letting the music steady her nerves. It did not fix anything, but it gave her a way to endure without disappearing. At the restaurant, the Saturday sets became routine enough that no one treated Mara like a novelty anymore. That was what she wanted. She wanted music to be part of her life, not a headline. One holiday weekend, Mr. Chen asked her to play a little longer, and the dining room filled with a gentle warmth that made even the stressed staff breathe easier. Leela smiled while polishing cutlery. Paul leaned against the bar watching the room with tired satisfaction. And Mara felt gratitude for the ordinary people who had helped her without turning it into a spectacle. Later that night, while counting tips in the back, Mara thought about how strange it was that a cruel bet had cracked open a door she had kept shut. She did not thank the cruelty. She did not romanticize it. But she recognized something important. The moment that was meant to shame her had revealed what she still had, and what she could rebuild step by step, without abandoning the responsibilities that shaped her. When she got home, she checked on her mother, then sat at the keyboard by the window. She played a few quiet chords not as a performance but as a promise to herself. Her life had not transformed into a fairy tale. She still worked hard, still worried, still carried heavy days. But she had regained a part of herself that made the rest bearable. And she knew now that she could choose that return again and again, patiently, realistically, and with dignity. By January, Mara's Saturday sets had become ordinary in the best way. People still noticed the music, but they no longer treated it like a spectacle or a rumor brought to life. They came for dinner, for birthdays, for quiet dates after long weeks, and the piano simply helped the room breathe. Mara liked that. She liked being part of the atmosphere instead of being the story. She also liked the discipline it forced back into her life. On weeknights, she practiced short, focused sessions at home on the keyboard by the window, careful not to strain her wrists after long shifts. She kept a small notebook of pieces and goals, not romantic promises, just practical steps. 2 scales each day, 1 new section slowly, 1 familiar piece all the way through without stopping. It felt like returning to a language she had once spoken fluently, but now with an accent formed by years of exhaustion. The beginner lessons started cautiously. The man Sir Rena had introduced her to brought his daughter, Ellie, to the community center on a Wednesday evening. Ellie was 11, small for her age, with a serious face that softened only when she sat at the keys. Mara expected the usual resistance, the fidgeting, the boredom, the quiet embarrassment of making mistakes. Instead, Ellie tried hard and apologized every time she missed a note, as if she believed errors made her unworthy of attention. Mara recognized that kind of apology. She had lived inside it for years. She told Ellie something she wished someone had told her sooner, that the piano was not a courtroom. It was a place to practice being honest. She asked Ellie to play 1 note and listen to how it rang out, then play it again with a softer hand. Ellie did, and her shoulders dropped a fraction. That tiny shift made Mara feel a surprising tenderness. Teaching was different from performing. It required patience, not adrenaline, and it gave something back in a quieter way. Mara limited herself to 2 students at first, then 3, keeping a hard boundary around her schedule because she knew how easily she could burn out. Some nights she still came home so tired her bones seemed to ache, but the tiredness felt less hopeless than before. It felt like effort with direction. At the restaurant, the staff began to rely on her set as a sort of anchor. Paul scheduled his most difficult tables earlier, so the dining room would settle during the piano hour. Leela made sure Mara actually ate something before she sat down to play. Even the cooks timed certain tasks around the music, stepping out for a moment to listen when the kitchen allowed it. No one said much about it. They just made space. Mara realized that was a kind of care too. One night after a particularly rough week, Conrad returned again. He came alone and he chose a table near the bar, not near the piano. Mara noticed him when she brought water to a nearby table, and she felt the old memory tighten her stomach. She reminded herself to keep moving, to keep working, to let his presence be what it was, just another customer. Near the end of her set, she saw him watching from a distance. He did not smirk this time. He looked tired, older than he had looked the night he placed money on the table like a weapon. When Mara finished, she stepped away from the piano and started walking toward the service station. Conrad intercepted her gently, not blocking her path, just standing in the open space near the host stand. He asked if they could speak for a minute. Mara hesitated, then nodded, because the restaurant was still full and public, and she trusted herself now to leave if she needed to. Conrad looked at the floor before he looked at her. He said he had been wrong. He did not dress it up as a misunderstanding. He said he had treated her like an object for entertainment, and it made him feel powerful in the moment, but it was ugly. He admitted he had told himself it was harmless because he had paid, as if money erased cruelty. The honesty in his voice was uneven, like someone speaking a language they had avoided. Mara listened without softening her expression. She felt no urge to punish him, but she also felt no urge to comfort him. She told him she accepted the apology, not as forgiveness that erased what happened, but as acknowledgement that he finally saw it clearly. She added that she hoped he would not do that to anyone else, because not everyone had a piano nearby to protect them. Conrad's jaw tightened as if the sentence landed where it needed to. He nodded once, thanked her, and walked out. After he left, Mara felt a strange calm. The apology did not change the past. It did not repay the humiliation he tried to create. But it removed one lingering question she had carried, whether people like him ever understood the damage they caused. Sometimes she realized they did, and sometimes it still did not matter as much as the life you built afterward. Spring brought more offers. A small hotel lounge asked if Mara would play 2 evenings a month. The pay was better than the restaurant, but the schedule was later and she could not leave her mother alone that long. Mara negotiated instead, offering early evening sets. The manager agreed. It was the first time Mara remembered negotiating without feeling guilty, as if asking for terms made her ungrateful. She was learning that boundaries were not an attitude, they were a survival tool. At the community center, Jamal asked if she wanted to be part of a small program that paired local performers with youth workshops. Mara almost refused out of fear, then said yes to one workshop as a trial. On the day of it, she sat in a circle of teenagers who looked bored and guarded. She told them she was not there to make them love piano. She was there to show them how music could be a place to put feelings that had nowhere else to go. One boy laughed and said feelings were for people who had time. Mara looked at him and said she understood, because she had spent years working too much to feel anything on purpose. She told them she played again because she got tired of disappearing. The room went quieter, not magically inspired, just attentive. Mara demonstrated a simple chord progression and asked them to create a melody over it, even if it was only 3 notes. A girl with chipped nail polish tried, then tried again, and smiled when it sounded like something. Mara watched that smile and felt the same tenderness she felt with Ellie, the quiet relief of someone realizing they could make something true. Her mother's health remained fragile, and there were setbacks that reminded Mara not to romanticize progress. One week her mother's symptoms worsened, and Mara spent 2 nights in a hospital chair, dozing in short bursts. Mara missed a Saturday set and a lesson. The old fear returned, that everything she built could vanish the moment life demanded something else. But this time, the world did not punish her for having responsibilities. Paul texted to tell her the restaurant understood and would reschedule. Serena checked in with a simple message, no pressure, just care. Jamal told her the center would hold her slot whenever she was ready. When Mara returned to work, Leela hugged her in the back hallway and said quietly, "We've got you." That support did not erase the exhaustion, but it steadied Mara. She realized she had been living as if she had to do everything alone, as if accepting help meant becoming dependent. Yet the truth was simpler. People could carry each other in small ways without keeping score. By summer, Mara's life looked different from the outside, but it still felt grounded on the inside. She still served tables. She still counted money carefully. She still carried worry about her mother like a second heartbeat. But now, woven into all of it was music as a real part of her schedule, not a fantasy, not a secret, not a single dramatic night. On an ordinary Tuesday, Mara opened a small envelope from the community center. Inside was a check for a modest amount, payment for a performance and 2 workshops. The number was not huge, but it represented something she had not had in a long time, income tied to her identity rather than her endurance. She set it beside her bills and felt her eyes sting, not from gratitude to anyone in particular, but from the quiet recognition that she was rebuilding her life with her own hands. At the restaurant, Mr. Chen asked if she would help plan a small anniversary night for the business. Just a relaxed evening with live music and a few menu specials. Mara agreed, and for the first time she found herself thinking like someone with a future in the place, not like someone passing through until something broke. She chose pieces that matched the room, gentle and welcoming. On the night of the event, the dining room filled with regulars and new faces, and the staff moved with practiced teamwork. Mara played and looked up occasionally, seeing people laughing, leaning close, holding hands, wiping their mouths and smiling at the warmth around them. She noticed Ellie and her father near the front, Ellie sitting straighter than she used to. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, as if she now understood that music belonged to her too. Ellie caught Mara's eye and nodded, proud in a way that made Mara's throat tighten. When Mara finished her last piece, applause rose again, steady and real. She stood, thanked them and went back to work because that was still part of her life. Later, after closing, she stepped outside into warm night air and let herself stand still for a moment. She thought back to the night Conrad bet against her, the way she had felt cornered and exposed. She understood now that her real victory had not been the applause or the money. It was the way she had taken that moment and used it as proof that she could return to herself. She had turned a humiliation attempt into a practice of dignity. At home, she checked on her mother, who was sleeping softly. Mara sat at the keyboard by the window and played a few quiet chords, not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, just to mark the day. The notes filled the apartment with a steady calm. Mara knew the future would still carry problems, because life always did. But she also knew she was no longer waiting for permission to be who she was. She had a job, a family she cared for, and a talent she refused to bury again. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough to build on. The anniversary night left Mara with a quiet, steady pride that did not fade the next morning. It was not the kind of pride that demanded applause again. It was the kind that let her wash dishes at home and still feel like she belonged to herself. She went through the weekend as usual, laundry, grocery planning, checking her mother's pill organizer, responding to Ellie's father about the next lesson time. The difference was that Mara no longer treated music like a fragile glass she was afraid to touch. She treated it like part of the structure of her week, something she protected the same way she protected rent money and sleep. At the restaurant, Paul noticed it too. He did not compliment her directly because he was not that kind of manager, but he began scheduling with her piano hour in mind like it was non-negotiable. Leela started asking Mara what pieces she was working on, not as gossip, but like someone asking about a friend's normal life. Even the kitchen staff, who once barely knew her beyond table numbers, began calling her by name more often. Mara did not romanticize the change. She understood that people respected what they could see. Still, she let herself accept it. One afternoon, Serena called with an idea that sounded bigger than anything Mara had planned. The community center wanted to host a small fundraiser, nothing fancy, but organized enough to draw sponsors and local business support. Serena asked if Mara would be willing to be one of the featured performers, along with a few others, and whether she would also speak briefly about returning to music as an adult. Mara's stomach tightened the moment she heard the word speak. Performing was one thing, but talking about herself felt like reopening an old wound for strangers to look at. Mara tried to decline politely, saying her schedule was tight and her mother needed her. Serena did not argue. She simply said they could arrange it to be short, and she believed Mara's story would help people understand why the center mattered. Mara promised to think about it, then hung up and stared at the wall for a long minute. That night, as her mother rested, Mara sat at the keyboard and played without a plan, letting her hands choose simple chords. She realized she had been speaking her feelings through music because words had once failed her. But maybe, she thought, words did not have to be perfect. They just had to be honest. The next lesson with Ellie made the decision clearer in a way Mara did not expect. Ellie arrived quiet and tense, then confessed she had to play a short piece at school and felt stupid practicing because other kids laughed. Mara listened, then asked Ellie to play for her right there, mistakes and all. Ellie hesitated, then started. She stumbled twice, flushed, and nearly stopped. Mara asked her to keep going. Ellie finished, breath shaking, and looked up like she expected a verdict. Mara told her the truth. She said playing while afraid was still playing. She said the point was not to avoid being laughed at, the point was to learn that laughter did not get to decide your worth. Ellie stared at her, then nodded slowly as if she was storing the words somewhere safe. When Ellie left, Mara sat alone in the room and felt the weight of what she had said. She realized she needed to live it too. Mara called Serena back and agreed to perform and to speak with conditions. She asked for a short speaking slot, no dramatic introduction, no mention of the bet, no framing her as a miracle. Serena accepted immediately. She said that was exactly the tone they wanted, honest and human. In the weeks before the fundraiser, Mara prepared with the same practical discipline she used for everything else. She chose 2 pieces, one gentle and familiar, one slightly more challenging that showed her range without turning it into a competition. For the speaking part, she wrote notes in her small notebook, not a speech, just bullet points that kept her grounded. She practiced saying the lines out loud while washing dishes or folding laundry, so the words would feel like part of her mouth, not borrowed language. Her mother watched her with quiet attention. One night her mother said she was proud, and Mara felt tears sting behind her eyes. Her mother added that pride did not erase guilt, but it could sit beside it. Mara squeezed her mother's hand and nodded, because that sentence matched their life more than any inspirational phrase ever had. The fundraiser night arrived warm and noisy. Folding chairs filled the room, and local businesses had donated snacks and small items for raffle baskets. The audience was bigger than Mara expected. She saw Ellie and her father in the second row. She saw Paul and Leela near the back, having arrived together after their shifts. She even saw Mr. Chen, standing quietly by the wall, hands folded, as if he did not want to take up too much space in a room that was not his. Mara waited backstage, listening to the first performer, a teenage singer with a clear voice and shaking knees. Mara's nerves rose, but she recognized them now as energy rather than warning. When Jamal introduced her, he kept it simple, just her name and a thank you for supporting the center. Mara walked out, sat at the piano, and placed her hands on the keys. The room quieted not because she demanded it, but because people were ready to listen. She began, and the first piece settled into the space like a warm cloth. She did not chase perfection, she chased steadiness. By the time she moved into the second piece, her breathing had evened out. Her fingers did what she had trained them to do, and the music held her up the way it always had, even when she tried to deny it. When the applause came, she stood and nodded, then stayed near the piano for the speaking part. Her mouth went dry. She looked at the faces in front of her and reminded herself she did not owe them a performance of emotion. She owed them truth. She told them she had played as a child and stopped as an adult for reasons that were not unique: money, family, exhaustion, fear. She said returning was not a sudden transformation. It was small choices repeated, practicing 10 minutes when she could, showing up even when she felt behind, accepting help without feeling ashamed. She said the center mattered because it gave people a place to return without being judged for leaving. She ended by saying that art was not only for people with easy lives, it was also for people who were tired, and people who were taking care of someone else, and people who were rebuilding. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment, then applause rose again, not louder but deeper. Mara stepped off stage and felt her hands tremble after the fact, like her body releasing the tension it had held. Serena hugged her briefly. Jamal thanked her. Ellie looked up at her with wide eyes that said, "I heard you," and Mara felt that look land somewhere in her chest that had been tight for years. After the fundraiser, things did not become magically easier. Mara still worked long shifts. Her mother still had bad days. There were still weeks when Mara canceled a lesson because her mother needed her, or when she chose sleep over practice because her body could not hold more. But the difference now was that Mara stopped interpreting those moments as proof she did not deserve music. She began to see them as part of a life that included both responsibility and joy. Late that summer, Mara made a decision that felt both risky and sensible. She asked Mr. Chen for a small increase in pay for the Saturday sets, not because she wanted special treatment, but because she had become a consistent draw and she had grown more reliable as a performer. She came prepared with facts, average weekend covers, how long people stayed, the increase in reservations since the music returned. Mr. Chen listened, asked a few questions, and agreed to a modest raise. He did it without drama, and Mara realized she had crossed another invisible line. She was no longer waiting to be noticed. She was advocating for herself. On a quiet weeknight, Mara sat at home with her mother and filled out a form for a part-time certificate program at a local community college, music theory and accompaniment, one class at a time. She did not enroll in a fantasy. She enrolled in something she could realistically finish while working and caregiving. When she clicked submit, her heart raced, not because she believed it would fix everything, but because it was a future shaped by choice. The next Saturday, after her set, Mara walked through the dining room and heard a couple talking about how the piano made the place feel like home. She overheard a tired-looking man say he came back because the music helped him breathe. Mara did not interrupt them. She simply carried a tray of plates to the kitchen, doing her job, feeling the strange, steady satisfaction of being useful in more than one way. Near closing, Leela leaned against the counter and asked Mara if she ever thought about that first night, the bet night. Mara paused, then nodded. She said she thought about it sometimes, not with anger like before, but like a marker on a map. Leela asked if Mara wished it never happened. Mara considered the question carefully and said she wished the cruelty never happened, but she did not wish away what she built afterward. She said the important part was not the bet. The important part was that she played anyway. When Mara got home, her mother was awake, sitting up and watching an old movie. Mara sat beside her with a blanket and listened to the dialogue for a while, then stood and moved to the keyboard by the window. She played softly, keeping the volume low, letting the notes settle into the apartment like evening air. Her mother watched her with tired, affectionate eyes and said she could always tell when Mara had a good night, because Mara's shoulders sat differently. Mara laughed quietly and admitted it was true. She finished the last chord and turned off the keyboard, then sat again beside her mother. Mara knew there would be new problems. Her mother's health would not become simple. Bills would keep coming. Some weeks would still feel like survival. But she also knew she had something steady now, something that belonged to her and could not be taken away by someone else's opinion. She had rebuilt her relationship with music in a way that fit her real life, and she had built relationships with people who respected her boundaries. She went to bed that night thinking about Ellie's school performance, about the next community center workshop, about her college class starting soon. None of it was a miracle. All of it was possible, and that was enough. Mara did not realize how much her life had changed until a Tuesday evening when nothing special happened. No crowded dining room, no applause, no tense conversations. She came home with grocery bags cutting into her fingers, found her mother asleep with the television still on low, and moved through the apartment with the quiet efficiency she had built over years. She put food away, checked the pill organizer, and sat at the kitchen table to sort mail. Among the envelopes was a thin letter from the community college confirming her part-time enrollment. One class, one semester, one decision that would not fix everything but would make her days feel less like a loop. She read the letter twice, then set it down carefully as if it might vanish if she moved too fast. For a moment she felt the old fear rise, the fear of wanting something and then losing it. She let the fear sit there without obeying it. Later that night, Ellie's father texted to say Ellie had played her school piece without freezing. He said she still made mistakes, but she did not stop, and afterward she told him she kept going because Mara said the piano was not a courtroom. Mara stared at the message until her eyes stung. The pride she felt was not loud. It was the steady warmth of seeing her words become useful in someone else's life. She typed back that Ellie should be proud, then added that mistakes were part of being brave, and she meant it for herself too. On Saturday, Mara arrived at the restaurant early. Mr. Chen was already there, inspecting a new set of menus. He looked up and asked if she had a minute. Mara followed him to the quiet corner near the piano. He told her the restaurant had done well since live music returned, and that reservations on Saturdays were now consistently stronger. Then he said he wanted to formalize her role, not as a favor, but as a regular paid part of the business. A simple contract for her Saturday hour, a small raise, and a commitment to keep the piano maintained. Mara listened, surprised by how much that word contract steadied her. It meant predictability. It meant respect written down. She asked for time to read it before signing. Mr. Chen nodded and said of course, then added almost awkwardly that he was glad she played here. He did not say it like praise. He said it like recognition. During her set that night, Mara played with a calm that came from repetition rather than adrenaline. She looked up occasionally and saw the dining room moving the way it always did, forks lifting, glasses tilting, people leaning into conversation. In the middle of her second piece, she noticed Conrad again, seated near the bar. He was not watching her like before. He looked like a man who came to eat and keep his thoughts to himself. When their eyes met briefly, he nodded once, then looked away. Mara returned her gaze to the keys. That small exchange felt like the final shift, not forgiveness, not revenge, just the closing of a door that no longer mattered. After the set, Mara returned to tables. An older woman asked for her name and told her the music reminded her of her late husband. A young couple said they came because the room felt softer with piano. A tired-looking man at a corner table said he had a stressful job and the hour helped him breathe. Mara thanked them, not taking their words as a burden to keep performing for their comfort, but letting the kindness land where it could. She had spent years absorbing sharpness from strangers. She could learn to accept softness too. In the weeks that followed, Mara began her class. She sat in a small room with students who were younger, older, and everything in between. Some were there for careers, some for curiosity, some because they needed a second chance at something they had put down. Mara took notes carefully and asked questions when she did not understand. She felt embarrassed sometimes, not because she lacked ability, but because she had once known more than she remembered. Still, she returned each week. She learned to let beginner moments exist without seeing them as failure. Her mother's health did not make room for this progress in a neat way. There were mornings when Mara woke to her mother coughing hard and had to reschedule a lesson, cancel practice, and spend the day in clinics and waiting rooms. The old frustration returned on those days, the sense that life always asked her to choose. But she noticed something new too. The world she had built around her was sturdier. Ellie's father did not complain when Mara rescheduled. Serena sent a brief message saying she hoped Mara's mother was okay. Paul covered a shift without treating Mara like she owed him her dignity. One evening, after a particularly long hospital visit, Mara came home exhausted and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. They looked the same, slightly rough, nails short, knuckles tired. But now those hands carried more than plates and bills. They carried something she had returned to. She moved to the keyboard and played a simple progression very quietly, letting the repetitions slow her breathing. Her mother watched from the living room chair and said with a half smile that Mara always played when she was scared. Mara did not deny it. She said the music helped her feel like she could handle the next thing, even if the next thing was only getting through the night. At the restaurant, the anniversary of the bet night arrived without anyone announcing it. Mara remembered because she felt it in her body, a faint tightening as she walked past the piano. She thought of the humiliation Conrad tried to create and the way she had felt cornered, and she recognized a truth that surprised her. The hardest part of that night had not been the risk of failing at the keys. It had been the risk of being seen. Now she was seen in other ways. As a reliable employee who made the dining room better. As a daughter who carried responsibilities without drama. As a teacher to a few nervous kids who needed someone patient. As a musician who did not need a grand stage to be real. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Jamal called and asked if she would consider leading a small workshop series at the community center for adults returning to music. Not a glamorous program, just a few evenings for people who had quit years ago and felt embarrassed to start again. Mara almost laughed at the idea, then felt the seriousness of it. She knew that embarrassment. She knew the way shame could keep someone away from the thing they loved. She agreed to try a short series with clear limits, and Jamal accepted her boundaries without negotiation. The first workshop night, a handful of adults showed up looking uncomfortable, as if they were waiting to be judged. Mara began by telling them they were not there to prove they were talented. They were there to practice being present. She had them place their hands on the keys and play 2 notes, then listen. She watched faces soften, shoulders drop, small relief spreading through a room full of people who had been carrying unnecessary shame. She realized she had built a kind of second life, not separate from her first, but woven into it, where her experience was not only something she endured, but something she could offer. Toward the end of summer, Ellie played a short piece at the restaurant before Mara's set, just 1 minute, arranged quietly with her father and Paul. Ellie's fingers trembled and she missed a note, but she did not stop. When she finished, she looked at Mara with a proud, shaky smile. The applause was gentle and sincere, and Ellie's father wiped his eyes quickly as if embarrassed. Mara crouched beside Ellie afterward and told her she did well. Ellie whispered that she was still scared. Mara told her that being scared did not mean she should quit, it meant she cared. Ellie nodded like she understood something important. That night when Mara sat at the piano after Ellie, she felt the weight of what had come full circle. The restaurant was the same place it had been, the same corner, the same upright piano, but Mara was not the same person. She played with steadiness, and the notes carried a feeling that was clean and honest, not a performance of healing, but the sound of someone continuing. After closing, Mara signed the contract Mr. Chen had prepared. She read every line first. She asked one question about scheduling changes. She negotiated one small detail about notice if a set needed to be moved. Mr. Chen agreed. Mara signed, then placed the copy in her bag like it was both a document and a promise. Walking home, she thought about how people love to describe moments like hers as sudden turning points. She knew better. Her turning point was not a single performance. It was the decision to keep showing up afterward, to practice when she was tired, to accept help without shame, to speak up when someone tried to reduce her, to return to music in a way that fit her real life instead of demanding a new one. When she reached her apartment, her mother was awake, waiting with a cup of tea. Mara sat beside her and told her about Ellie, about the workshop, about the contract. Her mother listened with a quiet smile, then said she was proud of Mara for building a life that had more than one kind of strength in it. Later, Mara sat at the keyboard by the window and played a few soft chords, letting them settle into the apartment. She did not think about Conrad. She did not think about proving anything. She thought about the next class assignment, the next Saturday set, the next time her mother would need her, the next time she would need herself. She understood now that her life would never be simple, but it could be hers. She turned off the keyboard, stood, and looked out at the streetlights below. The future still held uncertainty, but it also held structure, community, and a skill she refused to bury again. That was not a fairy tale. It was a plan. And for Mara, it was enough. It was enough.